Okay, so have you ever gotten like a really amazing bouquet and you just wished it wouldn't die?
Yeah.
Like you wish it could just last forever. I'm talking about, those flowers that are just so perfect, you kind of want to put them like in a museum or something.
Yeah, like under glass.
Yeah, exactly. Well, guess what? There's a way to do that pretty close to that with eternal flowers.
Eternal flowers.
Yeah. Have you heard of these?
I have heard of them.
So that's what we're diving into today.
Cool.
What exactly are they? How do they go from just a regular flower to like this forever flower? And why are they becoming so popular? Um, Now, full disclosure, all of our information for this deep dive is coming from a video by a company called Sweetie Gifts.
Okay.
And they actually make and sell these eternal flowers.
That's good to know. I
Yeah,
mean, it's good to know where our information's coming from.
exactly right.
Sometimes there's a little bias.
Yeah, for sure. So Sweetie Gifts uses a few different terms for these flowers, like eternal flowers, preserved flowers, everlasting flowers, even infinity flowers. Are those all the same thing, or is there like, some nuance there?
It sounds like they might be referring to the same concept, but perhaps with slight variations in technique or branding.
Okay.
It makes me think of sparkling wine. Like there's Champagne, Prosecco, Cava, all sparkling wines, but with distinct origins and methods.
I gotcha.
So it could be something similar here.
Okay, so no matter what we call them, they all start with like a real fresh flower, right? They use roses, lilies, orchids, all those like classic beautiful flowers. But then they do something to them so they don't wilt and they don't fade.
Right, so they're no longer alive,
Okay.
but they've been treated in a way so they still look and feel like they are for years.
So it's not just like drying them out.
Right.
Because I've seen those dried flower bouquets. They're pretty, but they're very delicate, and a lot of the color kind of fades.
It's exactly. Eternal flowers are meant to be much more vibrant and resilient.
Hmm.
The process is fascinating, and Sweetie Gifts walks us through it in their video. They start with fresh flowers at their peak, and they carefully remove the moisture using special solutions.
Wait, so they remove the moisture?
Yes.
That's like the opposite of what you do with fresh flowers.
Right, but you have to think of it like gently coaxing the water out of the plant while preserving its structure.
Okay.
And they use a multi-step process, including ethanol.
Ethanol, like in hand sanitizer?
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
It's actually used in a lot of preservation techniques because it's so effective at removing water, but without damaging delicate materials.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so the moisture is out. What happens next?
Then they use a special setting liquid to help the flower hold its shape, almost like a scaffolding.
Okay.
And here's what really surprised me. They introduce color back into the flower using pigments.
So they're not just preserving the existing color, they're actually like enhancing it. That explains why, like the eternal flower arrangements I've seen, the colors just look so vibrant.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And because of this complex multi-step process, it actually takes 1 to 2 months to create an eternal flower from start to finish.
Wow.
Yeah,
So this is a serious process we're talking about here, not just like some quick drying trick
right.
that really makes you appreciate the craftsmanship.
Yeah, it does.
But I have to ask, how long do they actually last?
Well, according to Sweetie Gifts, you can enjoy these eternal flowers for 1 to 3 years.
Wow.
And here's where it gets even more interesting. No watering required. In fact, water can actually damage them.
Hold on, you're telling me I can have flowers that look amazing for years and I don't even have to water them?
That's right.
That sounds too good to be true, especially for someone like me who can barely keep a cactus alive.
Right.
So are there any downsides?
Well, there are some things to consider. There are other benefits, too, that Sweetie Gifts highlights. They claim that their flowers are also allergen-free, non-toxic, and eco-friendly.
Okay, now those are some pretty big claims.
They are.
We're going to have to dig into those a little bit later.
Yeah.
But for now, let's talk about what you can actually do with these eternal flowers. I mean, I'm picturing like bouquets, obviously, but is that it?
Not even close. Sweetie Gifts showcases a whole range of creative applications.
Yeah.
So you have the classic bouquets, of course, but also these stunning rose boxes, jewelry boxes, adorned with eternal flowers. Even home decor pieces like picture frames and centerpieces.
Wow.
The possibilities seem endless.
They even mentioned that big brands like Armani Beauty and Pandora use their eternal flowers for events and for gifts.
Yeah.
Which makes sense, right?
It does. It's a way to give something beautiful and unique that will last.
And it kind of fits in with that whole like sense of luxury, right? It's not something you just toss out after a week.
Exactly.
So how do you take care of them? Do you have to like, I don't know, re-preserve them every few months or something?
Well, the good news is caring for them is incredibly simple. Sweetie Gifts says, just keep them away from direct sunlight and moisture. Avoid touching them too much and dust them gently when needed. That's it.
Okay. That I can handle. Sounds a lot easier than remembering to water and fertilize.
Right.
But it does make me wonder if they're so low maintenance, does that take away some of the joy of having flowers? You know what I mean?
That's a great question.
Mm.
It depends on what you enjoy about having flowers. For some people, it's the nurturing aspect,
Yeah.
the act of caring for something and watching it grow. But for others, it's simply about the beauty and the ambiance that flowers bring to a space.
Yeah, and for those folks, eternal flowers could be the perfect solution.
Exactly.
You get to enjoy the beauty without the constant upkeep.
Right.
It's almost like having a piece of art that just happens to be made out of flowers.
That's a great way to put it.
Right.
They're artfully preserved. But we should probably keep in mind that all this information is coming from Sweetie Gifts.
Right.
And they obviously want to present their product in the best possible light.
Right, of course we have to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
But even taking that into account, eternal flowers seem pretty incredible.
They are intriguing, and there's so much more to unpack here. We've barely scratched the surface of their cultural impact and the potential ethical considerations.
Ooh, okay.
But we'll dive into all that in our next segment.
Sounds good.
It's fascinating to think about how eternal flowers play into our ideas about beauty and time, you know?
Oh, absolutely, because fresh flowers are beautiful, but they're also so fleeting.
Right.
Like you get them, they look amazing for a few days, and then they just start to wilt, and it's almost like this reminder of, how quickly time passes.
Yeah, that's a really insightful observation. I mean, the ephemeral nature of fresh flowers has always been part of their appeal, hasn't it?
Yeah.
They reflect those cycles of nature, the beauty and impermanence.
Right, but then you have eternal flowers, which are kind of like the snapshot of that beauty, frozen at its peak.
Right.
Does that change how we experience them?
That's a great question.
Do they become more about, like, preserving a memory than appreciating the present moment?
Some people might find that appealing, the idea of holding on to a special moment like a wedding or an anniversary.
Yeah.
But others might miss that natural cycle the way a flower changes over time.
Yeah, it's almost like two different philosophies of beauty,
Yeah.
One that embraces change and the other that seeks to preserve perfection.
And I think that's where the cultural aspect comes in.
Oh, interesting.
Different cultures might perceive eternal flowers in very different ways.
Yeah.
For example, in Japan, there's this strong appreciation for wabi-sabi.
Wabi-sabi.
Yeah, the beauty of imperfection and impermanence.
So would eternal flowers seem kind of out of place in that context, like going against the natural order of things?
It's possible, but it's also interesting to think about how they might be incorporated into those Japanese aesthetics, maybe as a way to preserve a specific memory or feeling associated with a particular flower,
Yeah.
rather than just the flower's physical beauty.
I could see that. It's like saying this moment was so special, I want to hold on to this feeling forever.
Exactly. It's not just about the object itself, but the emotions and the memories that it evokes.
Right.
And that's something that can transcend cultural boundaries, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's like how certain scents can trigger powerful memories.
Yes.
Eternal flowers could have that same kind of emotional resonance.
And speaking of emotions, we can't forget about the practical side of things. Earlier, we touched on those claims from Sweetie Gifts about their eternal flowers being allergen-free, non-toxic, and eco-friendly.
Right. Yeah, that's something I definitely want to explore further. Because if they really are better for the environment and people with allergies, that would add like a whole other layer of appeal.
Absolutely. But we need to dig a little deeper to see if those claims hold up.
Okay.
So let's start with the environmental aspect. We know that traditional flower farming can have a pretty significant environmental impact.
Oh, definitely. Like there's the water usage, the pesticides and fertilizers, all the carbon emissions from transporting flowers all over the world. It adds up.
It does.
Yeah.
So how do eternal flowers compare? Well, on the one hand, once they're preserved, they don't need any more water or ongoing care.
Right.
That's a huge plus.
And if they truly last for years, as claimed, that could potentially reduce the demand for fresh flowers, which would lessen the overall environmental burden.
That's the optimistic view.
Yeah.
But we also need to consider the preservation process itself.
Right.
What about those special solutions they use?
Yeah.
What are they made of? Are they biodegradable? What happens to them after they're used?
It's not just about the end product. We need to look at the entire life cycle.
Exactly.
From, the initial cultivation of the flowers to the preservation process and even the eventual disposal.
And that's where things get a bit more complicated. There's not a lot of readily available information about the specific chemicals used in eternal flower preservation or how they're handled.
So it's hard to say for sure how eco-friendly they really are. It seems like there's potential for them to be more sustainable than fresh flowers in some ways, but we need more transparency from the industry to make like a fair assessment.
I agree. It's like with any product that claims to be eco-friendly.
Right.
We need to look beyond the marketing and really understand the specifics.
Okay, so let's move on to the allergen-free claim. This one really piqued my interest because I have a friend who's allergic to pollen, and she absolutely loves flowers,
Oh.
but she can barely be around them.
Right. I could see how that would be a game changer.
Yeah.
But again, we need to look at the science.
Okay.
Are all eternal flowers truly allergen-free? Or does it depend on the type of flower and the specific preservation process used?
That's a good point because pollen is the main culprit for most flower allergies.
Right.
But some people are also sensitive to the scents or even the sap of certain flowers.
Exactly. So even if the pollen is removed during the preservation process, there might still be other allergens present. It's definitely something that people with allergies should research carefully before bringing eternal flowers into their homes.
Yeah, maybe consult with their allergist too, just to be safe.
Absolutely.
It would be terrible to get an eternal flower arrangement and then have an allergic reaction to it.
Exactly. It's always better to err on the side of caution when it comes to allergies.
Okay, so we've covered the environmental and allergy aspects. What about the non-toxic claim? I'm assuming that refers to the chemicals used in the preservation process.
That would be my guess as well. And it's a valid concern. We want to make sure that the products we're bringing into our homes are safe for ourselves and our families.
Right, especially if you have kids or pets who might be tempted to, touch or even taste the flowers.
Exactly. And again, it comes down to transparency.
Okay.
What are the specific chemicals used? Are they considered safe for indoor use? Are there any potential health risks associated with long-term exposure?
These are all important questions to consider. It seems like there's still a lot of research that needs to be done on the potential health effects of eternal flowers.
Yeah. And until we have more information, it's probably best to approach them with a healthy dose of caution.
I agree, and I think that's a good takeaway from this part of our deep dive. Eternal flowers are fascinating, and they have a lot of potential benefits. But it's important to be aware of the potential downsides, too.
Right. We can't just get swept up in the marketing and the beauty of it all.
Yeah,
We need to be informed consumers and make choices that are right for ourselves and our families.
absolutely. And that brings us to another interesting aspect of eternal flowers, the potential ethical considerations.
Ooh,
Yeah.
okay. What kind of ethical issues are we talking about?
Well, it starts with the sourcing of the flowers themselves. We know that the floral industry has faced some criticism for labor practices in certain parts of the world.
Right, I've heard about that. Issues like low wages, unsafe working conditions,
Hmm.
even child labor in some flower-producing countries. It's heartbreaking.
It is. And it's something that we as consumers need to be aware of and demand better from the companies that we support.
So when it comes to eternal flowers, we need to ask, where are these flowers coming from?
Mm-hmm.
Are the workers who cultivate and harvest them being treated fairly?
That's a crucial question. It's not enough to just focus on the end product.
Right.
We need to think about the people behind it, too.
Exactly. And ethical sourcing goes beyond just labor practices.
Okay.
It also involves environmental sustainability, which we touched on earlier.
Yeah.
Are the farms using responsible land management practices? Are they minimizing their impact on the surrounding ecosystem?
So it's a multifaceted issue, and it's not always easy to find this information.
Right.
But it's worth the effort, right? To
Mhm.
know that the products that we're buying are not only beautiful, but also ethically sourced.
Absolutely. And I think that's where consumer power comes in.
Yeah.
By demanding transparency and accountability from companies, we can help drive positive change in the industry.
It's like voting with our wallets, right?
Yeah.
Choosing to support companies that align with our values.
Exactly. And I think that's a good segue into our next segment where we'll delve into some of the philosophical questions surrounding eternal flowers.
Mm.
Questions like, do they feel less real because they've been preserved?
Ooh.
Or do they feel more real because their beauty endures?
Okay, now that's getting deep. I love it. Okay, so we've covered a lot with eternal flowers, like how they're made and the environmental impact and ethical sourcing and all that. But now I kind of want to get into like the philosophy of it all.
Oh, okay.
Does the fact that these flowers are like preserved change how we see their beauty?
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting. Eternal flowers, they kind of challenge our ideas about beauty, don't they?
Yeah.
I mean, we're so used to beauty being fleeting,
Mm-hmm.
it fades with time.
Right. It's like that whole saying, all good things must come to an end.
Exactly.
But eternal flowers are like defying that.
They are.
They're offering us this permanence that we don't usually think about with nature.
And that permanence can be both alluring and a little unsettling, I
Mm,
think.
yeah.
Like, on the one hand, it's tempting to want to hold on to beauty,
Right.
preserve it in its perfect form.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, isn't part of the beauty of nature its constant state of change,
Right.
that cycle of growth and decay and renewal?
Yeah. It's like if a flower never fades, do we even notice it anymore?
Right.
Does it just become another thing in the room?
That is a fascinating question.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if it's magic.
Mhm.
Its ability to surprise us and delight us.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's the opposite.
Okay.
Maybe by preserving a flower, we're actually like intensifying its beauty,
Okay.
making it more precious because we know it won't last forever, even in its preserved state.
I'm thinking about those like ancient artifacts that have been preserved for centuries, like Egyptian tombs or Roman mosaics and stuff. They're still breathtaking, even though they're from like a totally different time.
That's such a great example.
Yeah.
There's a sense of awe and wonder that comes from encountering something that has endured for so long. And maybe eternal flowers can evoke that same feeling,
Mm,
even if it's on a smaller scale.
right.
They remind us that beauty can transcend time,
Yeah.
that it can be captured and cherished, even if the original source is faded.
So it's not about like denying the natural cycle of life and death.
Right.
It's more about saying, okay, beauty can exist in different forms.
Exactly.
And that even preserved beauty can still have meaning and value.
And that meaning is going to vary from person to person.
Of course.
I mean, for some, a turtle flower might be a cherished memento, a tangible reminder of a special occasion or a loved one.
yeah.
For others, it might be a piece of art,
Mm.
a celebration of nature's beauty captured in this unique and lasting form.
And for some people, it might just be a pretty thing
Right.
that makes them happy and brightens up their space.
Exactly. There's no right or wrong way to experience it.
That's what makes this whole topic so interesting.
It does.
Eternal flowers, they make us think about beauty and time and nature in a whole new way.
They do. They challenge us to question our assumptions
Mm.
and to appreciate the beauty that can be found in both permanence and impermanence.
I feel like we've explored so many different sides of eternal flowers in this deep dive.
We have.
From like the technical stuff to the cultural aspects to like the big philosophical questions.
It's been quite a journey.
And I have to say, I'm walking away with like a whole new appreciation for them.
Me too. It's amazing how something as seemingly simple as a flower can spark such a wide-ranging and thought-provoking conversation.
Yeah, and hopefully our listeners are feeling inspired to explore these ideas further too.
Absolutely.
So, dear listener, if you ever get an eternal flower as a gift,
Yeah.
or if you're thinking about getting one for yourself or someone special,
Right.
take a moment to really appreciate like the artistry and the story behind it.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to ask yourself those deeper questions,
Hmm.
What does it mean to you? How does it fit into your own idea of beauty?
And as always, we encourage you to do your own research. Seek out information from a variety of sources and come to your own conclusions.
There's so much more to discover about eternal flowers.
There is.
And we hope this deep dive has given you a good place to start your own exploration.
Absolutely.
That's it for this deep dive into the world of eternal flowers.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.